Anxiety and stress is a product of thinking about the future. Depression is always the product of thinking about the past. The problem is not stress itself or anxiety itself. The problem is not depression itself. The problem is how we're using the mind. Because if you stay in the present moment and we just take a breath, and I'm looking at you and you're looking at me, this is all there is right here.
Welcome everyone, I'm Sam Sebastian, and you're listening to How Are You Doing Really? In today's episode, I have the honor of speaking with my friend Joseph Meador. Just to give you a little information on Joseph, he received his formal education in the US and in Israel. He studied social sciences, biblical studies, and ordination. Master of Theology in Systematic Theology, eventually getting his PhD in Philosophy of Education. He also studied Jungian theory, Gestalt theory, and various forms of yoga and meditation. Joseph, in addition to all of that, is just one of the sweetest, most heartfelt beings that I've had the opportunity of interacting with, and just really grateful for him and what he shares today in the episode. So I look forward to sharing this all with you. Welcome everyone. I am Sam Sebastian, and today I'm joined by my friend Joseph Meador. And I met Joseph a couple of years ago, almost maybe 3 or 4 years ago in Austin, when me and my partner Finn were visiting. Him and Joe have been friends, and Joe's been a mentor of Finn's for a while, and has really looked up to you. And the brief interactions that we've had, I just was really touched and impacted by getting to just be in your presence and experience some of your work at Garden of the Ancients. So I wanted to have Joe on today just to hear a bit about his experience these past 5-6 months or so, or just the year in general, with everything that's been going on, and with the pandemic and with the civil and social justice movements that are going on, and anything else that kind of is on your heart and at the surface during this time. But I'll let Joe say hi and share anything else he'd like to.
It's really good to be with you. And it's a very beautiful morning here. And so it's a real pleasure to be with you. Honored to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the time and being a guest on the show. I know that you have quite a busy schedule, and I really appreciate you making the time to do this today with me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Well, I wanted to maybe just start by asking the question that I do with all of my guests. How are you doing really? And just tuning into any emotions or things that are present for you in this moment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the non-cliched form of your inquiry, because, we're so, especially people from my generation, and I'm 62, are so used to the cliche questions, and we have these very well rehearsed cliche responses. But to actually get past uh, the armor that a lot of people have built up uh, is a really good thing. And so I'm doing very well, and just I feel very blessed and very thankful to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting, the kind of automatic responses that come from that question sometimes, or just leaving it at how are you doing. Even when we were talking a little bit earlier, I noticed myself just kind of give an automatic response, and I took a moment to kind of feel into, well, how was I really feeling in that moment, when we
Right.
had that exchange. And I felt kind of just getting things ready, and wanting to look at a couple of things before we got online together, and just noticing there was a little bit of anxiety in me as things approached the start time.
Yeah.
I really care a lot about this work, and doing this podcast, and yeah, I wanna do a good job. So I think sometimes when I kind of have somebody on that I really admire and look up to, it kind of brings up this nervousness inside of me. And one thing that I notice right now is just like being with you, and seeing you as I share this, my nervous system is actually kind of calming down a bit more. So it's cool.
Good. Yeah. No, that's good. Well, like I said, this is my first podcast, and um, in my own practice, um, self practice, over the years, I've really tried to learn, and the key is remembering to do it in the moment, and that is just to let everything go, because in a situation like this, and like I said, I've listened to your other podcasts, and uh, what strikes me is the genuineness, the gentleness, but also the honesty that you bring into it, and that your guests bring, and that really creates an environment that's been so rare, especially in our society. Just to be comfortable, to be yourself, and to say what's really on your heart, um, in an environment where that's really all that you're asking for. And so there's no, for me, there's no preparation, there's no study in this. It's just, as we did just a moment ago, just quiet the mind,
Mm-hmm.
and then just open up, because it's all there anyway. And there are no goals. I mean, there's no goal. It's just, how are you doing really? And it really is such a matter of perception,
Mm-hmm.
the perception that we bring into every situation. Um, and I'm a recovering type A plus personality. So it was, for many years, I remember telling someone when I was in I had just turned 30, and I said, I'm really living about 3 years ahead of this time. And it was so difficult for me. I found out, just to even uh, live in that moment, or that year, you know, let alone that moment. And but over time, with practice, you learn to just let all of that go, because it's so fictionalized. It doesn't even exist. It's the stress that we put on ourselves to perform, and yet there's no performance. In the present moment, in this now, it just is.
Mm-hmm.
And if people can get there, if two or more people can get there, if one person can get there, that's great. But in the act of conversation, and I'm always reminded of what Adler said about the difference between communication and conversation. And people can communicate, but not everybody can have a conversation because it requires that sense of mindfulness and just letting go in order to be able to hear and to be able to speak. And listening is the real key. Conversation it takes 100% of my mindful activity and 100% of someone else's. It's not a 50-50, it's 100% and 100%. Have a genuine conversation.
So true. I haven't heard it quite put in that way, but as I think about that, it really does. Like if I'm not really bringing my whole self forward in my conversations with people, there's a lot that I'm holding back or things, and that's information for me. Like, what is it about the situation? Am I feeling vulnerable? Is there something going on internally that I don't feel like I can share with this person? And
right.
Yeah, I think about being in certain spaces where I've had the permission to kind of open up in this way. And one of those places is Esalen, which we've talked about. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One of my teachers there, Perry Holloman, he's trained in Gestalt, and I know that's something you've also trained in. And he really like creates this container in which we as students go into self-inquiry and kind of share what's following whatever really is present for us, and sharing from that space. And I sometimes find myself having a challenge in places where maybe I feel overstimulated or just not as safe or just in myself or grounded to kind of open up in this way. And I kind of, for whatever reason, have in my mind like places like Esalen where I can be that way. And
right.
One thing that I've had happen with my partner Finn is he's really just, he's like, well, why can't we create that here in our home? It doesn't have to just be specifically at that place. We can create these spaces wherever we are with people. So it's something that I've really been trying to practice myself. And I'm curious, you've had various trainings, you've traveled a lot, and what have been some of the things that have really impacted your ability to practice mindfulness and presence with others, and really just be?
I think probably around 18 or 19, I took my first Gestalt class. That was in 1977, and that was in a small college. And West Coast Gestalt was going on then in a pretty good fashion at Esalen, mainly at Esalen, although there were practitioners in San Francisco, and San Francisco had its Institute of Gestalt Therapy, the old San Francisco Institute. And there's another one there now. I think Morgan Goodlander is with that one. That's an excellent program as well. But the forerunner of the current San Francisco Institute really exerted a lot of influence, and there were a lot of writings, but primarily things were being done at Esalen in the 60s and in the 70s. And then there was sort of this theoretical split between the East Coast and West Coast as far as Gestalt therapy was concerned. And Laura Perls, Fritz's wife, Fritz Perls, one of the co-founders of Gestalt therapy, and Laura Perls, went up to New York and established the helped with the New York Institute. And that's where one of my early teachers, Ann Teachworth, was from. And Ann also had a program in New York, and she co-taught with Laura. And I met Ann many years later and just really hit it off. But my orientation was more of the West Coast style, and hers was more of the, I would say it had a flavor of the East Coast that I hadn't come in contact with. And because contact is a real principle in Gestalt, the idea of contact and making contact. And so the idea of then learning to do something which I had never learned to do. In fact, for many years, I would think to myself, I'm making money being able to use my mind, to formulate, to express, to write. And I had written a lot and taught a lot on the undergraduate and graduate level. And I thought, well, it's all about the mind, And someone asks, well, would you introduce yourself? What comes out of my pocket is a business card, and immediately, we start talking about education or profession or whatever it might be too. And one of the things that I learned was that you're none of those things. In fact, you're not your mind at all. And so the key is, instead of getting trapped in all of that thinking and in all of those thoughts, which especially today in our society, because we are living in such compacted pressure today, that so many people are just, you have this expression in psychology, the double bind. And it's where you're in it if you do, you're in it if you don't, you're just in it. And if you try to move either way, you just are stuck. So many people feel that way today. And the reason is because they've given over to the concept, and this is a concept, it's not reality. But it's this mental construct or concept that I am my thoughts, I am my thinking. Whatever I think about myself, that's what I am. What other people think about me, that's what I am. What I think about other people, that's what they are. Mm-hmm. You see this type of polarization, especially today. The big theater, the theatrical production is politics. You see this, it's all of this projection. The idea is that I can observe or witness my thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. Mm-hmm. That's the real bottom line key. It's a key to meditation. It's a key to yoga, especially hatha yoga. And I remember taking my first hatha yoga class in 1977 too. I graduated high school in 77 and immediately moved into the dorm, and was just surrounded by all of these wonderful experiences that I had no clue about, So I'm taking Gestalt and I'm taking Hatha Yoga. Well, being brought up in a fundamentalist Christian family, I just thought, well, this is probably good for me. And it's, it was great exercise as far as stretching and becoming limber, and all that, I thought. But the real key is to help people get in touch with something that especially most people in the West are divided from, and that's their own body. Mm-hmm. Because that's where most people live, the mind, the kasha, the body. And so what Hatha Yoga and Patanjali is really good in the sutras about this. But most, back in 77, I didn't even come in contact with the Yoga Sutras when I was taking Hatha Yoga. That came later. But the idea is that you're not your body, and you're not your mind. This is what Hatha Yoga really strives to provide for the student. Not greater physicality, but rather a realization that I'm not the body and I'm not the mind. When we begin to make that separation, and I remember that was incredibly difficult for me, because again, being brought up without that awareness at all, I thought everything was mind and body, and you have this body mind construct in the West where that's what you are, and if you're born a certain way, that's what you are, or if you think a certain way, then that's what you are. Really? No. So being able to sort of peel back the layers, which is another Gestalt concept, peeling the onion, you might say. You learn to observe or witness your thoughts, but you also at the same time understand I'm not those thoughts at all. And when we start making that kind of mindful, purposeful separation, that's where the magic, that's where the change really comes. And that's what Gestalt helped me with, and that's what Hatha Yoga helped me with. But it came later because I was so muddled and confused as an 18 and 19-year-old when I was introduced to this, that it just didn't, at first, it just made no sense at all, except for some psychological principles or some, exercise type principles. But getting in touch with my body, well, I'm seeing it, here it is, I'm in touch with it. No. Or understanding that I'm not my thoughts, that was just as foreign to me. Rene Descartes, cogito ergo sum, he wrote in Latin, which means I think, therefore I am. So you reverse that, and our sense in the West, our sense of I amness is based on our ability to cogitate or to think. That's all wrong. That's not correct at all. You reverse that and you get the Eastern reality of it, which is I am, therefore I can think. And so the real understanding is I am that. And I am connected to everyone and everything. I am not my body. I am not my mind. Sri Nisargadatta used to say, I am neither conceivable or perceivable. People would say, well, what are you? I'm neither perceivable nor conceivable. In other words, I'm beyond the mind. I'm beyond identification with the mind or the body. And so Rene Descartes pens cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And so people's sense of self really became acquainted in the West with their ability to think. Now, it did a wonderful amount of good, for Western civilization as far as science and mathematics and things like this. But many other things had been done several thousand years before in the sciences and in mathematics, in India, for instance, and also Saudi Arabia. And we find now, especially in the area of theoretical physics, that we're actually proving what these writings in the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, we're proving that, wow, this is actual reality. This is not science fiction. This is not some sort of tribal superstition that we achieve superiority over in the West. No, what we're finding out, physics and science is now teaching us, I'm not my body and I'm not my mind. And so it's been kind of slow in coming in America, but now you see more psychological modalities really giving in to the reality of this Western type of thinking. And it's reorientating our entire perceptions of mental health, of who we are as human beings, and of what we are, which is revolutionary. And I can say this, I'm so excited to be alive during this time. I mean, at 62 years old. But, as Alan Watts was very fond of saying, if you want to know what's going on today, you have to jump in today with both feet. You cannot stay in your easy chair and just watch Fox News for the rest of your life, when you're an older American and, just mumble and grumble about the way things are falling apart, because really things are not falling apart in the sense that some people might think they're falling apart. In many ways, what I'm seeing is that things are falling back into place in a good and healthy way. But we're in the beginning of this period of time that's a real transformation. And it's going to take a while before it really impacts society. What we're seeing now is sort of a stage of infancy in this big transformation. Or as Carl Jung would style it, the age of Aquarius, we're just in the baby stages of this. But there's to think about what may come in the future, which is a concept, because there's really no future. There's only right now. But if we were to think in terms of the future and to be aware and observe, I'm doing this, I don't know if this is, but if I allow myself the opportunity to think that way, the world that can be created and it can be constructed is a really beautiful place.
That's a really that there's a simplicity to what you're saying, and then there's also, as my mind tries to make sense of it all, there's just like so much I want to ask.
I know, it's mind-blowing, really. The simplicity is the real key. And I'm not talking about giving lip service to simple-minded ideas. These, the idea that I'm not my body and not my mind, it's not simple-minded at all. In fact, it's no mind. But it's the real key. And once a person, any of us, starts to live that way, and I speak from my own experience. This is just my own experience. But when I really started living this way, I'd look around me, think about the past, think about the future. Well, when I was younger, and I mentioned earlier, that I told a colleague of mine, he was a professor, and I said, and I had just moved to Austin. This was back to Austin in 1993 to teach, and I said, I've been here a year, and I don't even feel like I'm here. I was so not grounded because I had these concepts and ideas about where I was going, where the school was going, where the students were going, and all of these things. That it was just so difficult to be grounded. That's a pretty common experience when you're young. And what it led me into was a great deal of anxiety and stress, because you don't know. Well, of course you don't. If you allow yourself to believe that your mind is projecting into the future, which is, when you really understand this, I mean, there's no future at all. There's just right now. There's just this moment, this moment that you and I are sharing. This is all the reality that there is. But as I got older, and I look back, and there are things that I wish I would have said differently, done differently. This can lead people who are older into a very common stage, which is the stage of depression. Now, understanding these two things, the way that we use our mind. When I was younger, I experienced living future pace, always in the future, never in the present moment, so much so that I didn't even feel like I was living in Austin when I had a house and uh, family and so forth. I mean, I was there, but I just couldn't feel grounded. It's because the mind process I was misusing to such an extent that I created my own anxiety. I was creating my own stress. And so anxiety and stress is a product of thinking about the future.
Mm-hmm.
Depression is always the product of thinking about the past. Now, I'm talking about someone with, as we would say in Gestalt, a good ego structure.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, that's our problem. The problem is not stress itself or anxiety itself. The problem is not depression itself, typically. The problem is how we're using the mind. Because if you stay in the present moment and we just take a breath, and I'm looking at you, and you're looking at me, this is all there is right here.
Yeah.
Is my wife in the other room? I don't know. Maybe. My perception, however, is just this moment. What's going on outside? I really don't know. The only thing I know is what's going on right now. And so the more that we learn to live in the present moment, in the here and now, the less anxiety that we'll have, the less depression that we'll have. Why? Because I'm not allowing the mind to run off into concepts into the future which don't exist, nor allow it to go back into the past and dredge up those, and we do this to ourselves, these wretched memories that we create for ourselves, which good psychological research really summarizes those things probably didn't happen at all the way that we remember them happening. But the fact is, the past doesn't exist either. The only thing that exists is what's happening right here, right now. And the more that we can stay in the present moment, the less anxiety, the less depression. Why? Because the mind is in this moment.
Yeah, no, I totally, I know there's a part of me that definitely can resonate with that and feels that. And then there's also this other part that's coming up as I hear you share this, and it's like, well, yes, and there's the reality of what there with life. There's things that are coming up that I know are coming up, like having to support myself, having to continue to work, having to navigate various projects. There's a lot that I know that as I stay present in the moment, I still think about what's coming up for me in the future. So like, how do we kind of marry that in a way that we're not so in this moment that we're not even like thinking about what's coming next, because it does feel a little abstract, and I'd like to see if I could maybe kind of bring it to something a little more concrete, if that
absolutely.
Okay.
And again, I think that I'm talking from my own personal experience. I had, throughout my life, I've had several what I would call awakening experiences. And the big one came in 2003. I had been practicing a process called Gyan Yoga. And one of my teachers in this process was Stephen Walensky. And Stephen had studied with Nisargadatta. And so I was watching Stephen on a DVD. And I just had this complete break, this complete separation. And I got it. And I remember going back and sitting on my sofa. I didn't know if I should go to work the next day. What exactly do I do? Do I just sort of move through life in the present moment, not worrying about a house payment or mortgage or children or whatever, what is this? Well, that's pretty typical after an awakening experience. And so I went, there was a wonderful minister in Austin who was the minister of a non-dual Eastern oriented church. And I went and talked to him and he said, well, you're in a liminal state. It's a liminal state. Okay, so I have to find out what that is. And it is. That's exactly right. You're right. It's this in-between state. It's a transition. And so he said, you just be very gentle with yourself. Don't make any major decisions. He said, just let this process work. But he said, that's good. You're on the right. You're doing it. Just let it work. And so I didn't have anybody to talk to about it, because most of my colleagues were, fundamentalist group, and there's no way that they're going to even begin to understand. So I sat with this by myself for quite a while and was working through it. But the issue is, you're fine, Again, going back to the principal teachings of yoga, the issue is desire. My father fought in World War II. I was brought up by a World War II veteran. He was a sergeant. He spent 3 years fighting in Europe. I was brought up in probably one of the most idyllic times in America. And my father was a Chamber of Commerce manager in the community where we lived. And so we celebrated the 4th of July, and everybody had a flag in the yard. He finished university. He graduated from Texas Tech College in 1949 with a degree in journalism. So he was wonderfully open-minded, and my mother was too. My mother had spent a year at college, and so my parents were educated, and which really helped me growing up, because I was just the weirdest kid, and I was the oldest. And I had a sister 13 months younger than myself, my sister, and we're very close, and we have such a close family. But this issue of desire is so tied to the American concept of having a job. And I saw my father defining himself based upon his job. And the job was important, the job ethic, And I certainly believe, that you need to cooperate in whatever living arrangement, you have to make a cooperation. But it gets down to this idea of desire. What do I want? Well, if you want bigger and better, then that may create some difficulties. I'm reminded of the various quotes in the Bible when we pray to God, as we were taught to do. You ask God to bless us with what we need, not what we want. There's a real distinction between the two, because I don't need a lot. I don't need a lot of food. I don't need a lot of
things.
The basics, the things. But in America, this is a vastly different concept, because we live in such a hyper materialistic society that has been produced by an economic system that says, if you're really patriotic, buy more, and buy American. Now, I don't want to deal with any of those ideas as far as the meanings go, but I'm just saying that's the way that we were brought up.
Mm-hmm.
And buy more, buy bigger, buy bigger. And so people began to be judged, especially after World War II, when America was so financially and economically blessed, globally blessed, really. People were then judging what neighborhood do you live in?
Mm-hmm.
What size house do you have?
Mm-hmm.
What is your bank account like? What kind of cars do you drive? Where do your children attend school? Things like this. My grandfather was a lifelong cowboy on the Matador Ranch outside of Matador, Texas, and he was born in 1873. He lived what I would say was pretty much the perfect life. He had what he needed and really not a lot more. And he was happy. He passed away at 93 and was happy until the day that he transcended.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this idea of desire. Stress, anxiety are many times coupled with this concept, this mental concept of desire, which is tied into one's definition of self and success and meaning. And if we live that way, that's a materialistic lifestyle. The unfortunate thing is religious systems, even within our own country, have so incorporated that it's almost indistinguishable. And we have what's called in the research, the health and wealth gospel. And that is if you really are a genuine Christian, you're going to be materially blessed.
Mm.
This is a vastly different concept than what Christians faced in the first 3 Christian centuries, when it was just not that way at all, And I'm using Christianity as an example.
Yeah. No, one thing that came up as you were just sharing, it's like I get that we don't need as much as we think we need. And we really can get by with a lot less than what we consume. And even just thinking about, like in India, I think it's is it the Brahmins, or is it another, who basically give up all of their possessions to kind of be this, they're just in service to others. And
Yeah, the concept of seva or service,
mm-hmm.
Which if you, for instance, my meditation teacher was Yogi Amrit Desai,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a pioneer, and he's still teaching. He was a pioneer of bringing traditional yoga to the West in the 1960s, and Yogi Desai is still teaching in Florida and doing a good work there. His teacher was a master yogi of a long lineage, and his name was Kripalvananda. Kripalvananda was a Swami, and there's a sense in which when you follow that particular path in India as a Swami, then you take vows of renunciation. And basically, you have just a manner of dress and a water pot, and you just go from place to place. Mm-hmm. And you find that people will give you food and sustenance and what you need, and you spend time and you teach village to village and so forth. And that tradition still very much exists in India. Um, and there's a sense in which when you're coming to terms with I am not the mind, I am not the body, there's a sense in which you'll also be faced with this idea of renunciation.
Hmm.
How much do I need? If I want to stay crazy, I'll stay on the treadmill. But if I'm tired of working this treadmill,
Yeah.
and I really want some peace of mind, how much of this stuff do I really need? How much do I even want? How much do I use? How much do I read? How much do I watch? How much do I see? You know, it's really wonderful to have a television in every room. I mean, very convenient, you know. But I mean, after a while, one breaks, do I need to replace that? One goes out, do I need to replace this? And you finally start coming to terms with this. But again, this is very difficult for some people in America because we're so surrounded by this materialistic, consumptive mind frame where we just consume, and buy. And Gestalt has these wonderful phrases: introject and retroject. Introjection is where you just sort of open your mouth and you're just spoon-fed whatever the media tells you, whatever anybody tells you. You basically introject or take into yourself without discrimination information, and you come to believe it.
Yeah.
You know, retroflexion is when you've had enough and you get sick of it, and it starts coming back up. And it starts coming back up in if it's healthy, it will start coming back up in ways such as really looking around and starting to discriminate. I don't desire this now. I need to maybe get rid of some things, or I need to make some changes in my life. Because if I'm really as concerned about my own mental health and peace of mind as I tell everybody that I am, maybe I need to take responsibility for my own well-being. And that means maybe making some lifestyle changes that 1 or 2 years before it would have been shocking for you to even consider making. But it really is about our attitude of want versus need, which is desire. And that's a real key. But it's not a lot of fun to think about when you're young. That's because there's still so much to get and buy and have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all kind of like buy into it. It's, we see other people around traveling, doing all these things. They have all the new devices and.
Right. Well, and you bring up a very good point there. And you look at if you look at the political landscape, and without making reference to one party or another, I mean, this phrase, for instance, just think about this. I'm just going to say this phrase, and just how does this resonate? Make America great again. What is it that you notice about that phrase? It's the last word. Again. Again is a past-paced term. So if I'm really going to discriminate and I look at that saying, make America great again, I want to know, what kind of time frame are you talking about? Are you talking about make America great again like it was in the 1940s? If you really look, it wasn't that, compared to today. When again are you talking about exactly? There's a real problem with that kind of thinking, because although it points forward, it's taking people to the past. You can't live in the past and live in the present moment. You've got to make a choice. You can't live in the future and live in the present moment. You've got to make a choice. And that's when I used to hear that. I'd taken the Gestalt classes, I've been taking the yoga classes, and I would hear older people say that, and I would always think, that is so easy for you to say you're old. Your time is about, you're not young and vibrant and vital anymore, and filled with,
Mm-hmm.
But the key is to teach this to children when they're younger, so that they can be a lot more discriminating and maybe not have quite the traumatizing adolescence that some of us had, because we're all, we all want to live in the future or the past.
The word suffering comes up as you talk about this, and how when I find myself kind of in that state of suffering, oftentimes I'm holding on to something that's in my past, and I can't let go of that. And when I have practices like yoga or meditation or mindfulness that do bring me into the moment, that do create more of a connection between my mind and my body, it changes my overall well-being and the way in which I'm thinking and all of it. And
yes,
in a way where I feel much better. Much better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Staying in the present moment has real therapeutic, medically scientific therapeutic benefits for the body. Because being future-paced, being in this constant state of stress about what may happen, results in the release of chemicals and hormones in our body that aren't supposed to be released in those doses, and it really does impact and affect the health. The same thing is true about depression. When you talk about serotonin, reuptake inhibitors, the SRI, you're dealing with serotonin levels there, and depression, if you stay in that constant state, now I'm talking about somebody with a good ego structure. I'm not talking about somebody who really does need who may be chemically imbalanced. I'm not talking about that person at all, but I'm talking about someone like you or I, pretty good ego structure. And yes, there are times I'll become anxious, but I can also bring myself out of it. Just like you, there are times when I can be depressed, and when I do, I think you're thinking of something about the past. What was it? And they go, "Wow, you're living in fantasy land," because that doesn't exist. Come back into the present moment. I remember when I first started this process, I wrote out a little piece of paper and I gave it to Camille, my wife, and I told her, I said, "When you see me, that I look like I'm depressed or anxious, could you just remind me of this?" And what I wrote out was, "Joseph, you need to move from the past or future into the present moment." And she did that. She'd go, "Joseph," and it finally got to the point where all you had to say is "Joseph," and I knew what she was going to say, and it really just, and I went, "Yeah, okay." And I would bring myself into the present moment, and those things are just gone because they don't exist. And a person with a good ego structure can do that, and that's part of this learning process. But it takes time.
For people who maybe don't have as strong of an ego structure and don't necessarily have chemical imbalances, what are some of the ways that you would kind of point them? What directions would you point them into kind of help them in that process of maybe creating a stronger structure for themselves?
I think learning to be patient and loving and gentle with themselves is really the first place to start. And we live in a society now where there's this term, narcissism, the narcissistic personality trait. I'm not sure what the current DSM refers to it as, but I know there are several varieties of it in there. But the idea of narcissism is this idea of self-love, which is based on the mythological character Narcissus, who saw his reflection in the pool and fell in love with it. And so there's this, but you have to, have a good sense of love, kindness, and concern for yourself. When you do that, you'll find yourself wanting to move into areas that really help you. And so one of the best places to start is with breathing, just learning to breathe. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the rishis and the yogis in India, if you went to India today and wanted to study yoga, you're not going to, typically you wouldn't, although they have them there now, thanks to America, but typically you would just find a yogi, and he may have one or two students in his little shala, and a yoga shala is a little house, and that's where he teaches and lives. And he would start teaching you about breath work and how to breathe. And basically to learn to use the mind to pay attention. Here's another interesting concept in Ayurveda, for instance, the Indian system of natural medicine and Ayurvedic therapies and Ayurvedic medicine. But in yoga and Ayurveda, there are 6 senses, not 5. Now in the West, we know the 5 senses: gustatory, taste, olfactory, smell, eyesight, audio, which is hearing. And we have the capacity as human beings, we have audio digital and audio analog. And we practice those almost without knowing it. We can pay specific attention to what a person is saying. That's one form. But we can also listen to the radio, drive, and have a conversation. That's another form of our hearing capacity. So we have hearing. And so we have the kinesthetic, we have touch, the tactile senses. But in Ayurveda and in India, several thousand years ago, they added a 6th sense. Do you know what that was? It's the mind. Now think about that. In India, the mind is a sense, just like tasting, seeing. And when I would teach a class on this, I would go up to a person and go, okay, you've got to help me. Because we have people who have this runaway mind. What's called in yoga, the common teaching is the monkey mind, this chatter you just can't turn off. And people say, can you help me? I would have people come to me and say, can you help me? I just can't go to sleep at night. I can't stop thinking. It's this pretty, again, with a good ego structure, that's a pretty easy fix. It's not, you just reorientate a bit. But I used to go up to students and I'd start walking in place. And I would go, okay, you're meeting me on 3rd Street in Austin, and I come up to you right now. So I'm saying, hi, can you help me? I can't stop walking. And the student would just look at me, he's kind of like, what? And I would go, I'm serious. I just can't turn it off. I can't stop walking. Can you help me? And it's kind of a ridiculous illustration, but it does illustrate the point that there are things that we have control over. And most people in America don't realize you can have, with some practice, control over your mind, control over your thought process. Mm-hmm. And but the mind in Ayurveda is actually considered a sense experience, just like smelling or tasting, or the kinesthetic, the touch you feel, and it's no different to them. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of unusual for people to think of it that way. But when we start really understanding the mind process, but the key to doing this is actually just paying attention to your breathing, watching the breath. What happens when you watch the breath? The mind
Yep.
It does. The mind subsumes, and it will just sort of gradually, what we would say relax.
Mm-hmm.
And in a few moments, with practice, you can get to what is the achievable state in all of yoga, all of meditation. In fact, you don't have to. And I would teach classes, and people would say, "Why don't you charge?" And I would go, "Because I don't charge you to breathe air." I said, "This is your natural birthright. This is who you are. I'm not, there's no charge for this. I'm just showing you what's there, But they would say, "Well, the state that I'm talking about is the no mind state, and it usually happens for just a second, but you catch yourself reflectively, mentally reflectively, you become aware that you're not thinking about anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the key. and for Americans, what you want to do is go back into that. Get in a relaxed space. I studied with Ralph Metzner many years ago at the California Institute for Integral Studies, and Ralph was Tim Leary's principal research associate. But Ralph would conduct these sessions, and you would get into the space where there's no mind. And what you want to do is get right back into it, and then learn to prolong it, make it last a little longer. But it may last just a second at first, and that's okay. Just be patient with yourself. Keep practicing. Don't put stress on yourself, but keep practicing, and you can elongate that to the point where at any time, at any place, even if you're on a subway in New York City, within an instant, you take a breath, boom, and you're in the no mind state. And you can stay that way. That's the key to yoga. That's the key to meditation. That's the state that is the state that you want to be able to achieve, because in that no mind state, that's the doorway to reality right there, to realizing who and what you really are. You're not the body and you're not the mind. There are no thoughts. And in that space and state, there's also no body.
I could just listen to you teach and share all day.
No. Well, it comes from my own experience, but I mean, this stuff, if I would have heard all of this, when I was younger, I would have gone, "Oh, this is fascinating. I want all this right now," But the thing is, you have to practice it bit by bit, but you have to start. Like G.K. Chesterton said, doing this is like art. You have to draw a line somewhere. You have to start somewhere. And so the breath work is really where I would begin. It was the place that really helped me to get to this no mind state.
Yeah.
The breath work is the key.
As you share, I think about the experiences with being in a practice and just noticing what you're describing happening for myself and just reflecting on that. And it really is such a profound practice for me to have in my life. And I'm doing this with people regularly. And I notice that I still go back into thinking about the future, thinking about the past. And I don't think it's to completely, maybe it's possible, I don't know, for myself to completely let go of all of that. I think it would really depend on my environment, where I'm at, who I'm surrounded by. But I do know that I've had that experience enough times to want to continue to cultivate that practice for myself. And
Yes.
it really has helped me tremendously in my life. And I think about when I really got into practicing yoga was when I had started sobriety, and going through that process, it was what helped me so much to get through my day. I would start out 7 a.m., 1 hour of yoga. And then the rest of the day, it really just set up such a, in my body, in my mind, just this way of being that I felt like I could operate from, that just enabled me to be more present with myself and not get so, because when I was using substances, like I was so anxious and so uncomfortable with being in the discomfort of my own emotions, my own feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally resonate with that. I relate to it as well. And I will say that with this practice, you will get to the point, and it doesn't take, you don't have to wait till you're 62 to get there, but you'll get there very quickly. But then you'll find that you are the master of your own ship. And you can walk into any room with whoever is there, in whatever environment it may be, and you'll be completely in control because you are already in control.
So true. I mean, I feel like I've had those experiences, even if they're brief. I've had that experience, and to know that it's possible, just to remember, I can achieve that.
Absolutely. And this is what I would tell what I tell my students. This is what living inside out is all about. Most people that we encounter in the mundane day-to-day world are living from the outside in. They're taking everything that they see externally as themselves or their wants or desires. There was a great sociologist named Emil Durkheim, and Durkheim came up with a theory many years ago called the theory of deprivation. And he used this in early studies on what was called then juvenile delinquency. And he said the reason that young people steal is because they see other people have certain things like a television, so they want a television. And so they'll go and take it. Now, without getting into all of that, I'm just saying that the feeling of being deprived, we see things on the outside that we think will give us some meaning, some status, some fulfillment. And we take that, whatever it may be that we see from the outside. It could be a person, we do that as well. We look at a particular person. I want that person, this person will complete me, make me, all of that. But it could be, a material object. Most people live from the outside in. But the key, and this is what we're talking about, and what you're experiencing, and what I'm experiencing is learning to live. We're both Americans, so we can say this to other Americans that are listening. For Americans, it's learning to live from the inside, knowing that you're not your mind, that you're not your body. Really beginning to practice that. Learning to be mindful, not having your mind full, but being aware, which is what Gestalt is. And Gestalt therapy was based on Kohler's who was a wonderful German researcher, his teachings, which led into the field of Gestalt psychology. Now, Gestalt psychology and Gestalt therapy are a little different. But what Gestalt psychology was based upon were experiments in perception, how we perceive certain things. And this is what led me into phenomenology, the study of real and abstract phenomena. What attracts us? Learning to live from the inside out, knowing who you really are, not who you've been told you are, not who you've been societally programmed. And the entertainment industry is really big on this, not who we've been programmed to be, not who we've been taught to be, told to be, shamed to be, but who we really are. And we find out that we're energy. I'm not my thinking. I'm not cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It's the reverse. I am, and therefore I can think, which in India is the sixth sense. And when we start understanding and conceptualizing ourselves a little differently, reorientating ourselves this way, our lives really do open up and become as wonderful as we imagine that they can be. It really is. You can be the master. You are the master of your own ship. Whether we take responsibility for that, all of us are. Anyway, regardless. And so it's just up to us to really understand how that process works. And it's not the way that we're programmed currently in our society, but changes are coming, and these changes are already there. And, one of the criticisms that my friends from India have about American yoga is it's so based on, again, paying money for these courses, and they're more like physical education. Fine. I understand that. And yes, I think we have a lot to learn about what authentic yoga really is. However, it's still helping thousands of people. Because I've talked to so many people who've been in yoga studios all over the United States. And they've had these awakening experiences because they got in contact with their own breath. That's the real key. And it doesn't matter, if you're going to pay $500 for 2 months of courses, whatever, or pay nothing. It doesn't matter how you do it. Just make contact with your own breath in a very mindful and aware way. And that's what I was getting back to earlier. That concept of awareness is a real Gestalt principle. And it's the principle in yoga. It's the principle in meditation. Just be aware.
Yeah.
And there's so much freedom. This is where liberty and freedom really do exist, because when you know who you are, and when you know what you're not, then you can make these amazing choices that are not based upon living from the outside in, but they're based from living from the heart, and that's living from the inside out. And that's authentic living right there. And you've experienced that in your own life.
I really have. And I think about how for so long I externalized things, and in order, even within my own eroticism or desire, I put it on a certain look, a certain body type, a certain whatever's kind of been put out there and conditioned in my mind to believe. And this practice that I've been coming into for the past couple of years of Tantra is really kind of looking inward for those things and not outward.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of undoing.
That's exactly right. And the word Tantra itself has this idea, loosely translated, of something that is woven, this fabric. And this is, I think, for many of us, the real suffering has been unlearning, and this process of unlearning, and this process of renouncing beliefs and lifestyles that we formerly had that we now see are not really authentic at all, but are just sort of the theatrical props that some people still use in our society. And there's still a lot of theatrics in our society. Is really an amazingly orchestrated entertainment experience, the whole thing, But learning to understand the warp and the weave of this fabric, as you've done in your own studies of classical Tantra, really do help you to come to this awareness, that it's not at all what it appears to be. It's a lot more wonderful and magical than you ever thought it would be.
Could have imagined, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh. Well, I want to ask you one more question before we wrap things up. And I'll look at your questions that you put out there and then see if there's one there or if something else comes to mind. So bear with me for a moment.
That's fine. Yeah, just whatever happens in the moment.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go with this question that you had given me. You and your wife, Camille, have had an amazing relationship. She's been a type 1 insulin dependent diabetic since she was 7 years old. How has this affected your relationship over the years?
Speaking for myself, and I can say that it's only brought us closer together. And that's not cliche. We've had an amazing relationship, and we still have an amazing relationship. Mm-hmm. 3 years ago, she had 2 heart attacks on the same day, and she's been disabled ever since, and spends most of her days in bed. But that's just the way it is. We had just a number of wonderful years together, active and so forth. She's the strongest woman I've ever known. And I will say that, and she's helped me so much because she is so incredibly honest. And when I meet someone who is just that honest, and this is something again that drew me after I'd taken that first Gestalt class in '77 to more Gestalt training, is the sense of honesty and openness involved. Just being honest. And what honesty really is. And I think for a lot of Americans, it's very difficult to be honest because we're taught through media and so forth. I mean, it's just all, and so many people are so confused now. We don't know, many people feel as though they don't know really what's going on. There's something going on, but so when you find an honest person, stick with that person, whether it's the friend, whether it's the lover, whether it's a mate or whatever, stay with people who are honest, because honesty builds trust, but it takes time. And so we've had an amazing relationship, and she has taught me, and I've certainly stumbled along the way, but she's always been there for me, and I've always been there for her. And C.S. Lewis made a comment one time about suffering, and he said, suffering was God's megaphone. And what he meant, what I understand him to mean about that is, and I'm not talking about creating my own suffering through thinking about the past or thinking about the future. I'm not talking about that kind of suffering. I'm talking about what I would call undifferentiated suffering, such as the suffering of another person that I love, through, in her case, a debilitating illness. C.S. Lewis's wife was named Joy, and he wrote that wonderful book, Surprised by Joy. And his wife had cancer and passed away. And he had never suffered as much. And I understand what Lewis meant by that. But in that suffering has been tremendous love and compassion. It's not always easy, Life is not easy. It's not easy with other people. I mean, we don't even make it easy to live with ourselves, right? And so bringing somebody else into the mix, you're just going, oh my word, But she and I are blessed in just a number of ways. We live in this little house on 5 acres deep in the Sam Houston National Forest. And we're surrounded by plants, and she loves plants. And so I have a little job that I go to, but the job doesn't define who I am. The job allows me to have and be blessed with things that provide for her. And but she gives me just as much back. I can't wait to get home. In fact, I don't go very many places. I'm home, and we're home together, and this is where we are, and this is where we stay. And we have our wonderful family of feral cats outside. It's a growing family, and so we feed them twice a day, and then we have our inside familiar cat Rose. And but for me, it has helped. Our relationship has helped me in ways that I don't know that I could. I don't know that I have the words to really explain it all. But I would not be the person that I am now without having had the experience of knowing her and loving her and being with her for these many years. Mm. And I just feel very blessed to be with her. And she practices mindfulness. She's incredibly tough and resilient. And we stay in the present moment as much as, as much as we can. And so every day is a blessing for us. And that's the way she feels as well. And this is our life. It is what it is in this moment. Mm. Why is it this way? I haven't a clue. And if people really begin to go into these other areas, it just brings confusion. I don't know why. Yeah. But she's been a type 1 insulin-dependent diabetic since she was 7, and it just started getting worse. And she's now only 43. But the diabetes has really begun to ravage the body. And but she's not her body. Mm. Hmm. She's not her mind, and she has a very strong mind. Yeah. She would have been a great attorney because she can wrap me up pretty quick. But we both know, that that this flesh is not. It's not all there is. This is not who we are. Mm. And so that gives a great optimism. But living in the present moment for us has been the real key, learning to do that. Mm. Learning to do it. And it's always a learning process because you always have things that want to pull you into the future or into the past. Always. You're doing just such great, and all of a sudden you get that phone call, and then your created memories start coming into play. And your memories, by the way, are created as well, and rarely are they the way you think. That's why in a court of law, an attorney can bring 4 witnesses and they all saw different things, mm-hmm. Because the memory is not completely reliable.
Well, to that point of getting the 4 different memories of what happened, you're also getting different perspectives and
Absolutely.
And I think
Yeah.
about the process of just recalling things, and even in my own experience of sharing it with people, I feel like something new comes out sometimes in what I'm saying, whether that's an awareness or it's my mind kind of shifting things around.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, many times, and this is true in psychological research. I mean, the idea of false memory syndrome. There was a real issue that affected the criminal justice system uh, back in the 1980s, um, and it resulted in this awareness. The American Psychological Association issued a report regarding false memory syndrome, and that is if you're led either by a therapist or an attorney into remembering something, and he or she is feeding you information in the process that can result in a false memory that you believe just as much as if it really happened or not. And it turned out that many of these cases didn't happen at all, even though people said they remembered them happening. But they went back and looked at transcripts and found out that they were being led into basically creating the memory. And so we know the mind can do that as well. But you mentioned perspective, and that's right. Everybody has a different perspective. We all come at things from a different angle, whether a lifestyle angle, cultural angle, linguistic angle, mental angle. It doesn't matter. Everybody has a different perspective.
And I want to say thank you for sharing so much of your experience and knowledge and wisdom, and I was just really touched by sharing about your relationship with Camille as well. And I know I haven't had the opportunity to meet her, but I hope that happens at some point.
Absolutely.
I would love to.
Yeah, you're always welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be wonderful. Yeah, I appreciate the invitation to be on. And again, I don't project myself as some authority. These are just things that I've experienced in my life that have helped me, and I hope can help other people as well.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and thank you as well. And you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you all so much for listening today. If any of you'd like to find out more about the work that I do, you can go to samsebastian.com. That's SAMSEBASTIAN.com. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show, please reach out to me via email. That's sam@samsebastian.com. Much love.